John Huston waited, 39 years to make the movie. And we had a lot of fun, Michael Caine and myself.
In a world driven by ego, applause, and flashing cameras, Sean Connery moved differently. He didn't chase fame. Fame came to him. With his commanding voice, razor-sharp gaze, and the kind of stillness that could silence a room, Connery wasn't just acting. He was defining what power looked like on screen. But behind that magnetic control was a man ruled by one principle: discipline. To him, film wasn't about spectacle or self-expression. It was sacred work, something you approached with respect, not vanity. And if you didn't share that belief, Connery didn't argue. He simply stepped away. From the beginning, Connery's rise wasn't the story of luck or charm. It was a story of grit. Born in the rough streets of Edinburgh, he learned early that the world owed him nothing. Every inch of his career was earned, every line delivered like a promise. He didn't come from privilege or polish. He came from sweat, work, and pride in doing things properly. That same pride became the foundation of his craft. When he walked onto a set, he expected everyone, directors, crew, and co-stars, to bring the same focus. Not perfection, but precision. Not fame, but truth. NHE didn't believe in endless rehearsals or emotional chaos masquerading as creativity. To him, the best performances came from control, the ability to do less but make it mean more. Silence, stillness, timing, those were his weapons. He once said that acting wasn't about pretending, it was about being. You didn't act to impress the audience, you acted to honor the story. And if another actor treated the camera like a mirror for their own reflection, Connery noticed. He could sense falseness instantly, and once he did, the connection was gone. And Connery's strength wasn't loud, but it was absolute. He carried himself with a kind of authority that couldn't be faked. On set, he didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. His presence did it for him, but that same presence could be intimidating. Younger actors often mistook his confidence for arrogance. It wasn't. It was clarity. Connery knew exactly who he was, what the scene needed, and when others weren't pulling their weight. And that made him both admired and feared. In FOR Connery, a film was only as strong as its weakest link. If someone brought ego, laziness, or uncertainty, it poisoned the rhythm. He believed that every actor had a responsibility, not to themselves, but to the story. That's why he didn't engage in feuds or theatrics. He didn't need to. His silence was sharper than any insult. He didn't waste time fighting those who didn't understand him. He simply refused to look their way. That, in Hollywood, was the ultimate punishment. NHE saw through performance, through charm, through reputation. He valued those who came prepared, those who respected the work as much as he did. For Connery, filmmaking was a collaboration of discipline. He often said that chaos doesn't create magic. Control does. Every role he accepted, every word he spoke, came from that belief. And when a co-star failed to match his commitment, tension was inevitable. Not because Connery wanted conflict, but because he couldn't stand compromise. NTO him, truth mattered more than harmony. If the energy was wrong, if the craft was diluted, he would rather endure friction than fake connection. That's why his career was filled with quiet rivalries. Not loud scandals, but subtle fractures where principles collided. He didn't feud for fame. He drew lines for integrity. As Hollywood evolved, Connery remained unchanged. Method actors came and went. Flashy performers dominated headlines. But Connery stayed still, an immovable force of conviction. His clashes weren't accidents. They were consequences of his standards. To work beside him was to stand in front of a mirror that reflected your discipline, or lack of it. Then as we move deeper into his story, into the legends he respected, the stars he rejected, and the co-stars who tested his patience, one truth becomes clear. Connery didn't build his legacy through friendship or flattery. He built it through boundaries. He didn't fight to be loved. He fought to keep cinema honest. NTHAT was the code of Sean Connery, and it's what made him unforgettable. When First Night began production in 1994, it had all the makings of a grand Hollywood epic, chivalry, romance, and two of the most magnetic men in cinema. Sean Connery as King Arthur, and Richard Gere as Lancelot. On paper, it was a perfect pairing. The seasoned monarch facing the reckless charm of youth, but behind the camera something was off. The air between them was cold, restrained, and unspoken. What audiences later saw as stoic tension on screen was, in truth, the reflection of two men who never truly connected. Connery entered the project with his usual gravitas. At 64, he was in full command of his craft, disciplined, composed, and grounded. For him, playing King Arthur wasn't just another role. It was a meditation on leadership, loyalty, and moral weight. He approached the character like a craftsman, precise, patient, respectful of the story's tone. But then came Gere, youthful, impulsive, his energy unpredictable. Gere's Lancelot was handsome, graceful, almost too polished. He moved like a dancer, flirted with the camera, and brought a glossy modernity to a medieval tale. NTO audiences, that contrast might have seemed artistic, the rugged king versus the smooth knight. But to Connery it felt artificial. He once described acting as truth told quietly, and Gere's performance, while charming, struck him as too aware of itself. Where Connery sought authenticity, Gere chased allure. The clash wasn't loud or public. It was a silent war of philosophies. Connery's stillness versus Gere's movement. His gravitas against Gere's gloss, non-set, Connery maintained his distance. He wasn't rude, just detached. He didn't believe in wasting energy on false camaraderie. Crew members later described how Connery would arrive early, prepared, scripts marked with notes, every pause rehearsed to precision. Gere, on the other hand, approached each scene with a sense of improvisation, often experimenting with tone or timing. For Connery, that lack of structure felt like disrespect. Not personal, but professional. He believed that when you walk onto a set, you've already done your work. You don't find your character in front of the camera. You bring him with you. NTHAT difference showed on screen. Their scenes together were technically flawless, but emotionally barren. The chemistry between Arthur and Lancelot was supposed to pulse with rivalry and unspoken admiration. Instead, it felt distant, like two actors performing parallel stories. Connery's eyes carried centuries of pain and dignity. Gere's carried a mirror's reflection. It wasn't animosity. It was incompatibility. Some insiders say Connery viewed Gere as a product of a new Hollywood, one obsessed with image over essence. Gere's confidence reminded him of the kind of performer he distrusted, actors who saw themselves as brands before artists. Connery, shaped by the rigor of stage training and decades of discipline, had no patience for vanity. He valued control, composure, and the quiet intensity that could fill a scene without effort. Gere's free-spirited charm, while magnetic, felt to Connery like surface without substance. Yet, despite their creative friction, the result was striking. The film may not have become a critical masterpiece, but their differences created a fascinating visual balance. Arthur's restraint amplifying Lancelot's rebellion. Ironically, what made them clash off-screen gave the film its emotional backbone. It wasn't harmony that fueled their performances. It was tension. When First Night wrapped, the two men went their separate ways, never working together again. Connery didn't speak ill of Gere publicly. That wasn't his style. His silence said enough. For him, art was about respect, and respect was earned through dedication, not charm. In interviews years later, when asked about the project, Connery kept his answers short, professional, almost indifferent. He wasn't one to hold grudges, but he never revisited ground he considered shallow. Their dynamic revealed something essential about Connery's philosophy. He didn't just want to act alongside other stars. He wanted to believe in them. He wanted to feel that shared commitment, that unspoken understanding that the work mattered above all else. With Gere, that belief never took root. The performance was beautiful, but to Connery, it lacked weight. And in the end, First Night became more than a medieval love story. It became a quiet study in contrast, a mirror of two generations of actors, one driven by control, the other by charisma. For Connery, it confirmed something he'd always known, that no matter how grand the production, the true test of artistry lies not in fame or flash, but in truth. When The Hunt for Red October went into production in 1989, it promised tension, intelligence, and the collision of powerful personalities. At the center stood Sean Connery as Captain Marco Ramius, stoic, deliberate, and precise, opposite a young Alec Baldwin, playing the analytical yet impulsive CIA analyst Jack Ryan. On screen, their energy crackled with unease. a dynamic that elevated the film's suspense. Off-screen, however, that same unease was very real. Connery approached the film as he always did, like a soldier reporting for duty. Every line, every pause was mapped out. He had spent years perfecting the art of efficiency, knowing his character inside out, arriving on time, and expecting others to do the same. Baldwin, meanwhile, was part of a younger generation of actors shaped by experimentation. He liked to explore, to improvise, to find the moment. That phrase alone made Connery wince. To him, the moment should already be found long before the camera rolls. Their working styles couldn't have been more different. Baldwin was enthusiastic, curious, eager to discuss motivation and delivery. Connery was decisive. If a scene didn't work, he didn't theorize, he fixed it. He preferred few takes, trusting instinct and preparation over endless variation. Baldwin's habit of testing alternate tones or line readings frustrated him. It wasn't that Connery disliked Baldwin as a person, he simply distrusted uncertainty. To him, it slowed the rhythm of the craft. And crew members later recalled how Connery's focus created a quiet intensity on set. He moved with purpose, speaking only when necessary. Baldwin's nervous energy seemed to bounce off that composure, sometimes turning awkward. Between takes, Connery would retreat to his trailer or study the next scene in silence, while Baldwin tried to lighten the mood with conversation or jokes that went mostly unanswered. There was no open hostility, just two very different temperatures trying to coexist. Yet, ironically, that tension worked. Their characters, the calm, commanding Soviet captain and the restless American analyst, reflected their real dynamic perfectly. Director John McTiernan saw the unspoken friction and leaned into it. The result was cinematic electricity. Connery's stillness magnified Baldwin's nervous urgency, giving their interactions a subtle authenticity that no amount of rehearsal could manufacture. After filming, Baldwin spoke with great respect for Connery's professionalism, calling him a master of control. But privately, it was known that the two never connected beyond the film. Connery appreciated Baldwin's talent but saw him as undisciplined, a man still learning the rigor of the craft. And for Connery, discipline was everything. When Baldwin was later replaced in the sequels by Harrison Ford, some speculated that Connery's quiet disapproval had played a role. Whether true or not, it symbolized something larger. Connery's belief that film was no place for uncertainty. You showed up ready, or you didn't belong. In the end, their clash wasn't born of ego, but of philosophy. Connery represented the old guard, mastery through precision. Baldwin embodied the new wave, discovery through instinct. On screen, that divide became art. Off-screen, it became a boundary Connery would never cross again. When The Rock exploded onto screens in 1996, it was more than a blockbuster. It was a masterclass in clashing energies. On one side stood Sean Connery, the veteran of calculated power, every movement deliberate, every word anchored in authority. On the other, Nicolas Cage, volatile, spontaneous, and unrestrained, a whirlwind of eccentric creativity. Together, they formed an unforgettable duo. But behind the film's kinetic energy lay a quiet tug-of-war between two opposite philosophies of acting. Connery had accepted the role of John Mason, a secret agent turned prisoner, because the character embodied what he valued most: intelligence, restraint, and purpose. He studied his dialogue meticulously, refining each line until it carried weight. To him, a script was sacred. You didn't toy with it, you honored it. Cage, however, thrived on impulse. Known for his wild improvisations and unpredictable flair, he often altered his delivery on the spot, adding new rhythms or bursts of energy the script never demanded. At first, Connery watched with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Cage's creative outbursts could electrify a scene or derail it entirely. He admired Cage's commitment, but the chaos unsettled him. Connery once said that a true professional never lets emotion hijack structure. On The Rock, he saw the opposite. Cage chased the high of spontaneity. Connery pursued the precision of discipline. Their relationship remained civil but distant. On set, Connery exuded quiet command, the kind that made everyone instinctively lower their voices. Cage, by contrast, filled the space with restless energy, often pitching new ideas or tweaking lines mid-shoot. Director Michael Bay, known for his explosive style, encouraged Cage's experimentation, which only deepened Connery's frustration. He wasn't there to experiment, he was there to execute. And still, Connery was too professional to let irritation show. Instead, he used the tension. His character's exasperation with Cage's nervous, talkative scientist mirrored his real feelings. Every sigh, every side glance, every moment of silence carried an authenticity that came straight from reality. What audiences saw as brilliant chemistry was, in truth, two men trying to hold their artistic ground without colliding. Despite their differences, Connery respected Cage's passion. He saw a spark of the younger generation's daring, something he didn't fully understand but couldn't dismiss either. Cage, for his part, revered Connery, calling him a, quote, mentor by presence, someone whose very stillness taught lessons without words. But admiration didn't bridge their divide. When the cameras stopped rolling, so did their connection. There were no shared dinners, no lasting friendship, only mutual acknowledgement of talent from opposite worlds. And after filming, Connery rarely spoke of The Rock in personal terms. He praised the production and the crew, but avoided discussing Cage directly. For him, the experience reaffirmed a belief he'd held all his life. Talent without discipline is like dynamite without a fuse. Thrilling, but dangerous. He admired Cage's fire, but knew he could never work that close to chaos again. And yet, their unlikely partnership created one of the most dynamic on-screen duos of the decade. Connery's precision gave shape to Cage's unpredictability. Cage's energy gave color to Connery's restraint. Together, they proved that even when art is born from friction, it can still ignite brilliance. But for Connery, the lesson was clear. Control was not just a method, it was survival. When George Lazenby stepped into the tuxedo of James Bond in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, 1969, he wasn't just taking over a role, he was stepping into a legacy built by Sean Connery. For years, Connery had been Bond. Suave, dangerous, and impossibly self-assured. His version of 007 was so definitive that audiences didn't just watch him, they believed him. So when Lazenby, a former model with no major acting experience, was chosen as Connery's successor, it felt to Connery like a breach of sacred ground. And Connery's relationship with the Bond franchise was already complicated. By the late 1960s, he had grown weary of the fame that came with it. The endless spotlight, the lack of privacy, the feeling that Bond was consuming his identity. He walked away, ready to reinvent himself as something more than the world's most famous spy. But when he saw who was replacing him, irritation replaced relief. To Connery, James Bond wasn't just a role, it was a mantle that demanded depth, control, and presence. In his eyes, George Lazenby had none of those. From the beginning, Connery viewed Lazenby's appointment as a symptom of Hollywood's growing obsession with image over substance. Lazenby had the looks, tall, chiseled, confident. But to Connery, he lacked the grounding that comes from years of training and understanding character. Acting wasn't about looking the part, it was about being it. Connery had spent years perfecting Bond's balance between charm and danger, mystery and vulnerability. Watching it handed to someone with a modeling background felt, to him, like a betrayal of the craft itself. When On Her Majesty's Secret Service premiered, critics were divided. Some admired Lazenby's effort, but most compared him unfavorably to Connery. The performance felt stiff, uncertain, as if the tuxedo fit, but the soul didn't. Connery, though silent publicly, was said to have watched from a distance with a knowing smirk. He didn't need to criticize Lazenby. The box office and reviews did it for him. And behind the scenes, the tension between the two Bonds wasn't personal. It was philosophical. Connery believed that authenticity couldn't be mimicked. You either lived it or you didn't. To him, Bond wasn't a caricature or a pose. It was about subtle control, a presence that filled the screen even when silent. Lazenby's approach, bold but shallow, only confirmed Connery's fears about where cinema was heading, toward a world where confidence replaced craft. When the producers eventually begged Connery to return for Diamonds Are Forever in 1971, he agreed, but on his own terms. The payday was enormous, but the motive was deeper. It was as if Connery wanted to reclaim what had been diluted, to remind the world who truly was Bond. And when he appeared again, Older but sharper, the balance of power was restored. NHE never spoke harshly about Lazenby in interviews, but his silence carried weight. To Connery, indifference was the sharpest critique of all. He didn't need to say Lazenby failed. The world already knew. In the end, the episode reinforced Connery's unshakable belief that the art of acting couldn't be handed down like a costume. It had to be earned, tested, and respected. For him, Bond wasn't just a role. It was proof that control, not charisma, was what truly defined greatness. When The Untouchables hit theaters in 1987, it marked a defining moment in Sean Connery's later career. Playing the seasoned cop Jim Malone, Connery delivered a performance of grit and wisdom that earned him his first and only Academy Award. Alongside him stood Kevin Costner, Hollywood's rising golden boy, clean-cut, idealistic, and full of youthful determination. On screen, they played mentor and protege, their chemistry fueling the heart of the story. But off-screen, that dynamic was more distant, more restrained, and in many ways, reflective of Connery's core belief: professionalism over personal warmth. Connery admired drive, but he didn't mistake eagerness for depth. From the start, he viewed Costner with a kind of guarded curiosity. Costner, then in his early 30s, was charming, polite, and deeply respectful of Connery's stature. He asked questions, sought advice, and treated Connery like the living legend he was. Yet Connery didn't respond in kind. Not out of arrogance, but because he didn't believe in forced mentorship. To him, acting wasn't a classroom. You didn't learn by asking for guidance. You learned by watching. And Connery's greatest lessons were never spoken aloud. They were demonstrated through his discipline. Non-set, he kept a certain emotional distance. Costner later described Connery as focused to the point of invisibility between takes, a man who seemed to retreat into stillness, saving his energy for the lens. Connery didn't linger for small talk or share anecdotes about Bond. He worked with precision, hit his marks, and expected everyone around him to do the same. The younger cast often joked that when Connery entered a room, the air seemed to tighten, not from fear, but from awareness. Everyone suddenly performed a little better, stood a little straighter. That was his quiet authority. Still, Connery respected Costner's professionalism. He recognized in him the makings of a serious actor, one willing to commit, to listen, to serve the story rather than his ego. But there was something about Costner's polished image that left Connery unconvinced. He found him a bit too pristine, too movie-perfect. In Connery's world, authenticity came with rough edges, with scars that didn't fade under the lights. Costner represented a new Hollywood, smooth, media-trained, careful. Connery came from the old world, where grit, imperfection, and unfiltered honesty were the measure of a man. When the film wrapped, their working relationship ended exactly as it began, respectfully, but without warmth. There were no grand farewells or nostalgic reunions. Connery went on to collect his Oscar, delivering a speech that thanked his director, his family, and his heritage, but made no mention of Costner. It wasn't a slight. It was simply Connery's way. He didn't believe in flattery. For him, the work spoke louder than any public praise ever could. In later interviews, Costner would always speak fondly of Connery, calling him the ultimate professional. Connery, however, remained characteristically reserved, rarely uttering his co-star's name. That silence wasn't coldness, it was consistency. He valued respect, not relationship, dedication, not dependency. In truth, The Untouchables encapsulated everything about Connery's code. He didn't need to dominate others to shine. His power came from stillness, from the certainty that the camera would always find him. Costner may have been the film's heart, but Connery was its soul, the living embodiment of experience, control, and quiet strength. And when he walked away from that set for the last time, he left behind not a friendship but a legacy. A reminder that in an industry obsessed with charm and connection, Sean Connery built his greatness on something rarer: dignity,